There are a lot of circulating theories out there regarding what happened with Jesus of Nazareth on Easter morning and what the apostles saw. Today I want to talk to you about my one big problem with atheist attempts to explain the data. Let's get into it. And it's this. They're ad hoc. An ad hoc is a Latin phrase that means for this. According to Merriam-Webster, an explanation is ad hoc when it is formed or used for a specific or immediate problem or need, or if it's fashioned or improved from whatever is immediately available. Here are a couple examples of ad hoc explanations so we can familiarize ourselves with this concept. Let's say that someone who is a young Earth creationist, which is someone who holds the view that the Earth is 6,000 to 10,000 years old, is introduced with the information that there are stars that we have observed that are millions of light years away. This means that the light from those stars, in order for it to reach our eyes, would have to travel for millions of years, which serves as very strong evidence for a universe older than 6,000 to 10,000 years old. Upon hearing this, the young Earth creationist, in order to maintain his preconceived belief, says, well, God maybe created the universe with the appearance of age. Or, let's say that an atheist is told about the fine-tuning of the universe for the first time. They're told that the probability of our universe coming about in the way that it has, by chance alone, falls within a fraction of a percent of a statistical impossibility. To avoid this problem and maintain their atheism, they say there is a multiverse with an infinite number of universes, knowing that an actual infinite can allow you to avoid any kind of statistical problems and can keep someone from affirming the existence of a designer. When someone puts these kinds of arguments forward, we can see that they're simply trying to avoid the obvious conclusion of the evidence rather than genuinely seeking the truth of the matter. If we want to be genuine truth seekers, we should all hold our beliefs with an open hand, willing to change our mind when the evidence leads us in another direction. Now, it's important to note that an explanation being ad hoc doesn't automatically make it false. Actually, in both of our examples, the young Earth creationist and the atheist could be correct. However, when we're making an inference to the best explanation, ad hoc reasoning is not encouraged. Now, there is something called the ad hoc fallacy, but this is only committed when someone puts forward their new theory as a fact, because in that case, they would have to assume the truth of their conclusion in order to prove their new theory. So, for someone in our examples to commit an ad hoc fallacy, the young Earth creationist would have to say, well, the universe just is still young, and God did create it with the appearance of age. Or, for the atheist, they would have to say, there just is an infinite amount of universes, because that's the only way to dodge the probabilistic problems and get rid of the inference to a designer. However, they would not be committing this fallacy if they put it forward as a mere possibility. The young Earth creationist can say, sure, it's possible that the Earth is old, but it's also possible that God created the universe with an appearance of age. Or for the atheist, they could say, yeah, it's possible that there's a designer, but it's also possible that there's an infinite amount of universes. So to be clear, in order for atheists to avoid using the ad hoc fallacy, they would have to put forward their resurrection hypotheses as a possibility rather than stating it as a matter of fact, because that would be begging the question against the resurrection. However, even if atheists put forward their alternative explanations as a possibility, they're still going to run into the problem of their explanations being ad hoc, even if they avoid the ad hoc fallacy. Philosophers have come up with a lot of criteria that help us find the best explanation. The first is explanatory power, which refers to the ability of a hypothesis or theory to explain the subject matter effectively to which it pertains. Could the effects of the theory, if true, be observed? Our second one is explanatory scope. Can the theory or hypothesis explain all of the data at hand? The third is simplicity. The simplest explanation is the one that contains the fewest assumptions. 4 is consistency. How consistent is our theory or hypothesis with other background knowledge that we have or beliefs that we hold? And finally, we want our explanation to be the least ad hoc. That means our theory or hypothesis is not created specifically for the purpose of avoiding unwanted conclusions. So I've been talking a lot about how atheist explanations are ad hoc or how they possibly could commit the ad hoc fallacy if they're not careful. But how do we know that atheist explanations for the resurrection are ad hoc? All of our earliest testimonial evidence points to the bodily resurrection of Jesus. If you read the New Testament documents, All of them tell us that Jesus died, was buried, and rose from the dead on the third day. We have no external testimony to an alternate theory regarding what happened on Easter morning. Therefore, any theory that doesn't appeal to the resurrection is going to be made for the explicit purpose of avoiding an unwanted conclusion and maintaining one's belief in naturalism or the impossibility of miracles. So you might be a skeptic and thinking, okay, my explanations are ad hoc. So what? Well, giving an ad hoc explanation for the resurrection is going to forfeit one of the other criteria for a good explanation in order to have sufficient explanatory power or scope. For example, if an atheist hypothesizes that the apostles all had group hallucinations to account for the post-resurrection appearances, or maybe they say the narratives referring to the empty tomb in the Gospels are fictional, they forfeit the criterion of simplicity by multiplying their assumptions, and the criterion of consistency by going against our background knowledge that group hallucinations of the same thing don't happen in order to maintain a naturalistic worldview that doesn't contain miracles. This means that in principle, atheist resurrection hypotheses are going to be bad explanations. They're going to have to become less and less simple, more and more ad hoc, and less consistent with our background knowledge in order to have sufficient explanatory power and explanatory scope. Ad hoc explanations for the resurrection also posit things that we have no evidence for. Good examples of this would be the twin theory or the alien theories. And if you have to put forward things that we have no evidence for in order for your hypothesis to work, it's probably not a good explanation. Finally, ad hoc explanations rely on logical possibility rather than what's historically plausible. Is it logically possible that multiple people hallucinated the same thing, or that Jesus didn't really die on the cross, but the soldiers merely thought that he was? Sure, but those things are not actually plausible given the data that we have. So, the major problem that I have with atheist theories is that in principle, they become bad explanations because they have to become less and less simple, less consistent, and more ad hoc in order to maintain our first two explanatory principles. This means that in principle, they are bad explanations. Maybe you're watching this as a skeptic and you're saying, okay, well maybe my explanation is less plausible, but anything is more likely than a miracle. It doesn't matter how much I have to add to the theory to make it work. Well, the first thing I'll say to that is check out my argument telling you why David Hume's argument against miracles is a bad one. By the way, don't forget to like and subscribe. Second, this comment either begs the question for naturalism because you're arguing that a miracle didn't happen in the past because miracles don't happen, or you're failing to recognize that any non-zero probability can be overcome in light of new evidence. You cannot simply ask, how likely is the resurrection prior to looking at the evidence, but you must also look at how likely it is in light of the evidence that we have. Also, if Jesus really was God in the flesh, as he claimed to be, then what is the issue with believing he could have rose from the dead? Christians aren't claiming that people rise from the dead all the time. We're saying that Jesus, God incarnate, did. This isn't unlikely at all if God exists and intended for Jesus to resurrect after his death, which we can infer as Christians from Old Testament prophecy. In conclusion, atheist theories for the resurrection are ad hoc. This doesn't mean that they are false necessarily, but it does mean that they cannot, in principle, qualify as our best explanation. Given that the resurrection hypothesis possesses all of our criteria for what a good explanation requires. If Jesus rose from the dead, we can explain the resurrection itself, the testimony surrounding it, the celebrations of the event that go all the way back to the time in question, and all of the data surrounding the origins of Christianity. The resurrection hypothesis has sufficient explanatory power, explanatory scope, is the simplest explanation of the data, is consistent with our background knowledge, and is the least ad hoc. For this reason, it still stands as our best explanation for what happened on Easter morning, while atheist explanations will always be fighting for second place. Thank you so much for watching this video explaining my biggest issue with atheist explanations of the resurrection. Hopefully now you can see that the resurrection hypothesis stands tall as the best explanation. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, subscribe to the channel if you're new and you want more content like this. This has been The Epitome. I'm your host, Nathan Bozeman. We'll see you around.